that I'm Nancy, and I'm a curator of the main Jewish Museum, and excited to be you a New Yorker. It's in Maine in the summer wonderful exhibition that we call News/Not News, and you have to come and see it to really appreciate it. But she's going to take you around and talk to you about many of the pieces, as well as I want to mention that she has exhibited really almost all over the world. Her work has been in Israel and other foreign countries, as well as New York, which is the place for an artist to be. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Marsha Annenberg. But Marsha, I've just been told I have to talk about the rules here. Please remain muted during the presentation. If you have any questions, put them in the chat box. We will do our best to answer all of them at the end of the presentation. But when we run out of time, we'll make sure to respond to you via email in the next few days. This presentation is being recorded. The recording will be emailed to you in the next few days. Thank you for your patience, and here is Marsha.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you so much for that kind invitation. I am a New Yorker and I'm a Maine, which is so upsetting, but I love Maine, and it's great to be here. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. I love being in person. We've been at a very long, dark road, and we're emerging from it, I hope. So I want to start my talk talking about the news profession, which has really declined over the past 30 years. The first painting I want to talk about is called Great American News. It's a humorous title because American journalism is really in trouble. You can see there's a newscaster smiling in the middle, the theater, comedy and tragedy masks are behind her. And at the very bottom, there's a quotation from Rosenquist's F-111, which is this, which I quoted from. And, I became a news junkie in the 1990s, which is when news was becoming more and more sensational. What do I mean by that? Well, for one thing, you may not remember the Bobbitt's marriage, but that took over the news for weeks and weeks and weeks. It was an example of terrible domestic violence in the marriage. And so I would go from American news to BBC. And what was the BBC covering? They were covering ethnic cleansing in Bosnia. And going back and forth, flipping the channels, it was mind-boggling, and it's like, how could there be such a big difference? But that was followed in America by Monica Lewinsky's blue dress. So was the dress ironed? Was it in the closet? Was it in the drawer? Was it stained? Was it dry cleaned? What was on the dress? Like, I don't know. That didn't go on for weeks, it went on for months. And, it's like, why was this happening? Why is this happening to American news? So an interesting statistic is that in 1983, there were 50 media companies in America. After 1996, 6 media companies in America, corporate news companies. And what happened to it? I think that these companies were looking for profits, so news was more and more sensational, probably until 9/11 happened. The most ludicrous stories took over our news, and I think the American people suffered from it. Well, look at the next painting. This painting was influenced by Edward Hopper. He's been a major influence on my artwork. This is Railroad Sunset, and my painting is called Dusk Road. It looks like a landscape, but it's actually not a landscape. It's a conceptual painting about the loss of the Fourth Amendment, because what was happening at one point, William Binney was arrested. William Binney was the head of Foreign Signals Intelligence, and he devised a program called Thin Thread that organized signals overseas in terms of the intelligence community. And one day he found out that Thin Thread was being used against the American population, but it was being used without encryption and without warrants. And I was thinking, like, what happened to the protection against search and seizure? I mean, isn't that search and seizure of our data why isn't our data being protected? So it looks like a landscape because you have hills and sky, but the colors are red, white, and blue, and saying what's happening to our country. Are we losing the Constitution? And that's the point of this painting. This painting is called Home on the Range. There's a very famous couple that it's modeled after, Grant Wood's American Gothic. So I took the man and woman from American Gothic, and they became couch potatoes looking at a TV set. They're surrounded by Wonder Bread. And it were two magazines for the newspapers. It's just a TV set that you would find. I felt like, that's amazing. So it sticks in my mind and found its way to this painting. But it's really, it looks like a humorous painting, but it's really serious because there's some statistics you should know about. America has been becoming more and more America-centric. So the whole America First movement, which has a long history, but has gained traction, actually took off because between 1998 and 2011, 20 American newspapers discontinued their foreign news services. No more foreign news bureaus. Pew Media report stated that between in 2013, there were half as many foreign news bureaus as there were in the 1980s. Just think about it, in 30 years, American news bureaus have closed down all over the world. So where are we getting our news from? Who's giving us the news? I mean, where are we getting it from? If our reporters aren't overseas, then who is overseas? And how reliable is that? So it's really talk about a serious issue because in an American bubble where we don't know what's going on in other places. Like, think of it. We were in Afghanistan for 20 years. How many people know anything about the life of the typical Afghani person? You know, I think it was not until Al Jazeera opened in America that I saw a public interest story about a music school in Kandahar that had reopened after the Taliban. Children playing their why is there a vacuum? Why don't when 9/11 recording in progress, when 9/11 happened, George Bush said, Saddam Hussein, Osama bin Laden hated democracy, they hate democracy, and that's why they attacked us. And I felt like, why would he hate democracy? But Osama bin Laden was writing because it wasn't out in the American newspaper. So, and it turns out he didn't hate democracy at all. There were three things Osama bin Laden hated. Number one, he hated that our troops were in Saudi Arabia because to him that was the home of the holy sites of Mecca and Medina. He didn't want American troops on the Holy Land. Number two, he hated Israel, and he documents all these things in so much writing. I mean, it's nothing was hidden. And number three, he hated that oil was $20 a barrel in the history of mankind. I mean, he had very strong feelings about this, but none of them had to do with democracy. None of them. So they're all delineated. I mean, it's out there for anyone to read. And it's, you know, it incensed me that they thought that if you just give the American people a simple idea, bin Laden hates democracy, that everyone would buy it and go running off to war. But where are the nuances? So what's the real truth? You know, so I was looking for like, what is the real story here? And where were our reporters? That's a question. This stuff wasn't hidden. It was in the London newspapers. It wasn't in Afghani newspapers or whatever, or Saudi Arabian newspapers. It was in London newspapers. So where were our people? Like, was anybody awake? You know, so 9/11 a surprise. If you were following what he was saying. This small painting is called Betsy's Dilemma. And it was really interesting when we started arresting people and bringing them to Guantanamo. They were called enemy combatants, right? What made them different from the people we captured during World War II? I mean, they were the enemy. So when did it become acceptable not to treat them according to the Geneva Conventions? There's a reason for the Geneva Conventions, because you don't want our kids treated badly when they're captured. So when we capture people, we're supposed to be humane also. So it was really curious that by calling them something else, they North Glacier shed. And freedom, Iraqi is free the Iraqi people about is the fact that in 1972, and American companies really were not allowed in there. And at this point in time, the Iraqi oil is not nationalized anymore, and it's an international field for any company that wants to go into Iraq. But they never mentioned that. They talked about, oh, we're freeing the Iraqi people. Yeah, we're freeing the Iraqi people. We're also or the oil. This is called What You Do. And when you first look at the painting, it's very cheerful. You have the Wonder Bread dots, the film strip, Shirley Temple, you have Goofy. But there's another message underneath it all. And the message is Agent Orange and treated uranium behind everything. The thing is that the weapons that we've used in war are so destructive that Agent Orange is another name for dioxin. And when you spray dioxin on leaves to defoliate them, the dioxin goes into the groundwater and the soil, and it stays there. And we left, but the dioxin stayed in the environment. So what happened was it created birth defects. Also, all over treated uranium, the kids we sent a tank shell, and since it bursts on impact, it's radioactive. It sprays, it's airborne, it sprays into the air. So that our kids who were over there, of course, were affected by the blowback from the bombs exploding because they were in the vicinity. So they also have a difficulty with birth defects there, and a lot of our kids got sick in Iraq. So that's what so the painting looks really cheerful, but it's not a cheerful message. I want to move into climate now. This work is called Early Wednesday Morning. It's a takeoff, again, on Hopper. Did a painting called Early Sunday Morning. And what it's really about is the arrest of America's top climate scientist, James Hansen. And every time I show this picture, it actually makes me sick. Here's Dr. James Hansen. He was the head of NASA for 30 years. So why would a top climate scientist tie himself to the gates of the White House and get arrested? It's such an extraordinary event. And he was very concerned about the development of the tar sands in Alberta because it's a very dirty form of oil. Both producing it and burning it is very dirty. And he's been saying for years, actually since 1988, that the atmosphere is warming. And in 1988, people listened to him. It came to Congress 20 years later. Something else that nobody heard here. I found his speech in the Guardian newspaper in England. And what he said was, I want to quote it exactly. I don't want to make it up. He said, he called for the CEOs of fossil fuel companies to be, quote, tried for high crimes against humanity and nature. Our top climate scientists in 2008, this is what, 13 years ago, 14 years ago, wanted CEOs of fossil fuel companies to be tried for high crimes against humanity and nature. Can you imagine why his speech was not reported in this country? It's so unbelievable. And because we are changing the atmosphere. The atmosphere is not the atmosphere we grew up in. So in this installation, it's about his arrest. So who reported his arrest? Well, his arrest was reported in the Washington Post. Who didn't report his arrest? The New York Times, the LA Times, the Wall Street Journal, Detroit Free Press. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on. And it's an item that's reported in one newspaper. And people on the internet who follow environmental websites knew he was arrested, but nobody else knew he was arrested. So here our top scientists goes to the trouble of getting arrested, getting handcuffs put on him. I mean, how could you do that? I don't know, it's unbelievable. Nobody knew about it. Nobody knew about it. It's quite remarkable. It's really amazing. And if you think that was then, like, so this is 2013, but today everything is different, you'd be mistaken because just 2 weeks ago, a NASA scientist got arrested. Let me show you this picture. His name is Dr. Peter Kalmus, and he was arrested at Chase Bank with 3 other scientists. They chained themselves to the doors of Chase Bank. And why did they do that? Because Chase Bank was the top funders of fossil fuel infrastructure in the world. And you have to imagine that the International Energy Agency has warned everyone as of a year ago that fossil fuel infrastructure must stop. If we want to stay to 1.5 degrees of warming, cannot be any more fossil fuel infrastructure. So Dr. Kalmus, when he got arrested, actually started crying. I was like, why would a scientist cry when he's arrested? You know, because there's a climate emergency, but nobody knows about it. It's so interesting that in 2019, 11,000 scientists all over the world formed an organization called the Alliance of World Scientists. That is now up to 15,000. There are 15,000 scientists in this group declaring a climate emergency. I mean, if you figure that, like just last month, the North and South Pole were 50 degrees hotter than normal. It wasn't even in their studies. It wasn't even in their studies. Think about the fact that last summer, Portland, Oregon was 112 degrees. British Columbia in Canada, 121 degrees. It's off the charts. There is truly a climate emergency. And so how do you think American news media is covering our climate emergency? If you had to guess, what percent of news do you think our news media is covering climate? 5%, 10%, 15%? What would be your guess?
Less than 5%. 2%.
Close. Our news, our corporate news is the climate crisis. 1.2% of the time. 1.2% of the time, according to Media Matters. 1.2% of the time. And, you know, this is unbelievable. Because if you don't report something, I'll talk about in this piece, if something is not reported, people don't know that it's an issue. So this piece is called It's the Agenda. Stupid. I don't mean to be rude to anyone, but it is the agenda. What's the agenda? Well, the National Climate Assessment was published the same day that Harvey Weinstein was arrested. You all remember Harvey Weinstein? I don't want to go into him. So I'm walking down 57th Street. I'm on a newspaper stand. I see the Daily News and New York Post, New York Newsday. So of course, New York Post has Harvey Weinstein on the cover. Daily News has Harvey Weinstein on the cover. What did the New York News say? They did something extraordinary. Extraordinary. They made the National Climate Assessment the entire front page. It was unbelievable. And this illustrates the theory called the agenda setting theory, 1972, which says that what is reported is what people think is important. They did many, many studies. So if you don't report something, people don't think it's important. As a matter of fact, I was looking up what is important to the American people in 2021, and numerous things. The top three are affordability of healthcare, budget deficit, violent crime, immigration, gun violence, coronavirus, racism, blah, blah, blah. Climate change is number 10. Climate change is number 10. Our ecosystems are on the verge of falling apart, and climate change is number 10. What does this discrepancy mean? It means something. What does it mean about the American profession? You have the words for it. You know, so it's, I don't know. So the point is that they have editors have a choice. What are they going to present as news? And you can see that sensational news very often went out over real, urgent, and important news. This is called Hush, My Kush. It's about the Himalaya assessment. The Himalaya assessment talks about the melting of the Himalayan glaciers. So even if we stay to 1.5 of heating, they predict 1/3 of the glacier will melt. If we go to 2.0 of heating, 2/3 of the glacier will melt. It's a huge difference. So apparently, 2 billion people from 8 countries in Asia, 2 billion people, rely on glacial and snow melt for drinking water, agriculture, and energy. So this is happening now. Where are people supposed to go? Where are 2 billion people supposed to migrate to? But what's so amazing about this is that it wasn't the story in the press. I read about it in the New York Times, because the New York Times has a great climate desk. So who didn't report this news about 2 billion people being affected? The Wall Street Journal, Houston Chronicle, Dallas Morning News, Detroit Free Press. I mean, I can go on and on and on. Who makes the decisions? How are people supposed to know there's a climate emergency if it's not reported that way? The Guardian newspaper said, the big headline, 1/3 of the Himalayan ice cap is doomed. Sounds unbelievable, right? Was it hyperbole? Was it fake news? No, it was actually real. It was real news, but it sounded extraordinary. And why should we care? We're in America, because everything is going to affect us. You know, the amazing thing about the National Climate Assessment, which I didn't say, is that it predicted what happened last summer. If anyone had bothered to read it, because the National Climate Assessment, it's written by American agencies. It's written by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's written by the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, Department of Agriculture. It's an American document, you know. So it predicted the extreme heat and the extreme precipitation. You know, in New York City, 12 people died last summer in their basements because of a tropical rainstorm. My daughter was on the train during that tropical rainstorm, and she had to walk home. And I'm thinking, like, what if it was worse, because there's no pump. It's happening so fast, there's no pumping system that can meet the volume of water that's coming in. And it's really concerning. So I want to talk about this painting for a moment. It's a very personal painting. It's called Elegy. I went to go in Masada, and customs didn't find it in my bag. Thank the Lord. You're not allowed to bring stones home. But I was so moved. I was so moved to think about what went on in Masada and being surrounded, and how much grief, and how much loss has been associated with the Holy Land. And so we saw words about land, the meaning of the word land. And I just want to say, like, in conclusion to this talk, that news should not be a business. News should not be a profit-making business. Science of global warming is not hard to understand. Middle school students know that the symbol for water is H2O, carbon dioxide is CO2. When carbon dioxide and water combine and become carbonic acid, it's a very simple idea. The Gulf of Maine is losing their oyster population because of the acid in the water. You don't have to believe it in science and global warming. It's a fact, it's physics. Gulf of Maine is becoming acidic and warm, and we know that our lobsters are moving north. So the question is, how much of our ecosystems are we willing to lose? How much are we willing to give up? Are we willing to give up our coral reefs? Are we willing to give up our koala bears? How many died in Australia? I don't know, millions. Our phytoplankton. How much are we willing to lose as the ocean absorbs 22 million tons of dissolved CO2 a day? We are changing the chemistry of the ocean. At 1.5, we will lose 90% of our coral reefs. 90%. This is our goal. The Paris Climate Treaty is so interesting. That's a goal in practice. Zero, but it's catastrophic. And what will happen to the ecosystems of the world? Are we willing to lose that? Our press has failed us. Our press has failed us. A system of information that is dependent on advertising dollars has distorted the meaning and purpose of the free press. The press is not free. I want to advocate today for a new system of news gathering and the American News Service, like the BBC, run by journalists and not by market research consultants, hoping to make a profit. We need a public news service that doesn't depend on the whims of Congress for funding. We also need a system of education that doesn't teach to the test. Rather, we need an inquiry-based model of education. Paulo Freire said education consists in acts of cognition, not in transferals of information. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you.
Nice job. Yeah, thank you.
That's great.
Thank you. Oh, I forgot about my catalog.
Oh,
Look at
I'm
my
sorry,
catalog.
I forgot. I'm sorry. I'm so engrossed
Go on.
I just want to mention that I have a catalog on Amazon.com for sale called News.News, which has all the paintings you saw here today and many others. Thank you so much.